1969, man first sets foot on the moon.
Engine stop. APA at a descent. Mode control, both auto, descent engine command override off. Engine arm off. 413 is in.
We copy you down, Eagle.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
And another small step for mankind as America prepares to launch its first woman into space, astronaut Sally Ride.
The last week or so before flight is designed as kind of a quiet period. We don't have very much in the way of training. It's just going over the last minute details and going over the big picture of what we want to do. It's really more mental preparation. We do some T-38 flying in that last week just to try and get used to, as I said, having your ears confused. I think it'll be mostly mental preparation, and I know that I intend to try and go to bed early and to try and review in my mind all the things that I'm supposed to do during the flight.
20 seconds and counting.
I've heard that that is a moment that's worth waiting for. That is really exciting when they get down to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you realize they're really going to shoot this thing off.
We've gone for main engine start. We have main engine start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 0.
Roger.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour.
And the shuttle has cleared the tower.
This is Houston, where we live and work. There are 78 of us in the office. Out of the 78, 8 of us are females, and all of us are potentially going to space. I came down here in a class in 1980, and it was really sort of an adventure. Shannon Lucid's one of the 8 females in the office, and she was working in Oklahoma as a research biochemist before she came down here. She has 3 kids, but she still has time to fly airplanes.
Well, I got very interested in the space program, I think, from the pioneers, the pioneers in the American West and the covered wagons and going out to Oregon and California. And then from that, I got into wanting to explore the whole Earth. And then I decided that it had been fairly well explored, so the natural extrapolation of this was to think about going out into space. At the same time, I've been reading a lot about Robert Goddard and the rockets that he had been launching out in New Mexico. And so I just got real interested in the whole concept of space travel and the space program. It was a long time before America or anybody in the world was in a space program at that time, but that's what I decided that I would really like to do. Well, I tell you, the very first, when I was 5 years old, I went up for the first time. We lived in China at the time, and we were moving from Shanghai up to the Guilin Mountains for the summer. We were flying in an old Army transport airplane, and we were up, it was, they didn't have oxygen in the airplane, and we were up real high, and my brother had turned green, and my sister was throwing up, and I think my mother had passed out, and I was looking out the window, and I could see the runway down there, and I thought that was the most remarkable thing in the world, that a human being could land an airplane, because we were way up here, and you could see the runway down there. And so I figured that as soon as I grew up, I was going to learn how to fly, and I had to wait till I was 19 and had enough money. I worked, to earn the money, and then I went out, and the second time I was in an airplane was for my first flying lesson.
why has it taken NASA 20 years to let women in? It hasn't really taken NASA 20 years to let women in the program. We've had women working in the space program for a considerable period of time. And again, if you look at the criteria, when you look at just the astronauts, the criteria for selecting astronauts in the 60s and what was required, there were not a lot of women who met those requirements. So I think women have entered into the astronaut group, as have other people, because the criteria has changed.
I really find that hard to believe, in that it's taken nearly 25 years for this to happen, something that I thought should have happened in the mid-60s. I was surprised when they didn't turn up with a couple of women in the third group of astronauts. We brought 14 in 1963, and I was amazed. And I was still introducing classes of astronauts. I remember we brought 16 or 18 in 1966, and there still weren't any. I've introduced more astronauts than I was just to scratch my head and wonder why there weren't any women or why there weren't any blacks.
Prior to 1978, I'm not for sure a number of women, I'm not sure what number of women would be qualified to have applied to be an astronaut, but I know in the, say, 10 years prior to 78, that number greatly increased. There are many women in this country who certainly had qualifications back in 58 to be astronauts, but not hundreds of them.
I think it's primarily a function of the vehicles that we've had to fly. We have had the high G loads that were associated with the initial vehicles. It was on the order of 5 to 6 Gs for entry, which is a physical strain. We've had a very confined environment, and flying people of opposite sexes, it would be nice to have some privacy, and the previous vehicles just did not allow that. Space Shuttle does. And it did take away some of the requirements to be in big, heavy pressure suits. We don't have to do that. We can launch wearing shirt sleeves just like I'm sitting here.
I don't think they got in until, I think, 1980. About then was the first time they really, and then pretty much as mission specialists and that sort of thing. Of course, the bars have opened up now, and they have all the colors are represented, but I'm afraid we've been left in the lurch. There are competitors across have done fairly well. They fly Vietnamese pilots, they fly Cuban pilots. They flew a woman pilot 20 years ago. I don't know, maybe when they did those kinds of things first, we always answered, well, of course, that's not very important. When we do them first, it's always very important.
It would have been important had NASA selected this lady, Jerry Cobb, for astronaut training, but she just wasn't the best man for the job. In fact, she was ahead of her time. But 20 years later, Oklahoma does have its own female astronaut. That's Shannon Lucid. Meanwhile, in 1963, the Russians launched the first female into space, and her name was Valentina Tereshkova. It's not very romantic. When I found out they were hiring people like me, I thought, oh, I'd like to be one of those, and I never really considered it before. And mainly because I think when I was a little girl growing up, like the original 7, they were all military test pilots, and I don't think little girls were supposed to want to be like grown men with crew cuts at that point in time, so.
I'm a great disappointment to all the people that are carefully planning their career paths to become an astronaut, because I was not doing that at all. I was involved in a very exciting line of marine geophysics research that was leading towards investigating the nature of the ocean floor with 3-man submersibles that go down to depths of 6,000 or 8,000 feet. And I was really looking forward to that quite a lot. I was a graduate student in physics, and I just finished up my PhD before I started here. And I had honestly not thought about being an astronaut. I had not thought of that it was really a career possibility until I saw NASA's announcement back in 1977, I think, that they were accepting applications for astronauts. They hadn't selected any since the middle to late 60s. And I had never thought that it was something that I could apply for. And it was the moment that I saw the advertisement that I knew that's what I wanted to do.
read it. You go forward this morning in a daring enterprise, and you take the hopes and prayers of all Americans with you. Once again, we feel a surge of pride that comes from knowing we are the first and we are the best, and we are so because we are free. We sure wish you an awful lot of luck. We're with you 1,000%, and we're awful proud to have been a part of it. Good luck, John.
T-minus 45 seconds and counting. T-minus 40 seconds and counting. The development flight instrumentation recorders are on. T-minus 35 seconds. We're just a few seconds away from switching to the redundant sense sequencer. T-minus 27 seconds. We've gone for redundant sense sequencer start. We've gone for main engine start. We have main engine start. Liftoff of America's first space shuttle. And the shuttle has cleared the tower.
This year is also really important because the first black's going to fly, and his name's Guy Bluford. He's flying on the 8th flight of the shuttle. We have to keep fit because working in space is controlled by your stamina.
I don't think astronauts are Superman, and I think it's good for us. Each of us has his own thing, so to speak, with reference to staying physically fit, and some people in the office who like to play racquetball and handball. There's some of us who are joggers, and then there's some of us who are marathoners. I try and get about 5 miles in every day, and that keeps me fit, and it also keeps me trim. And that's pretty important because of the business that we're in, and you need to stay in pretty good physical shape in order to do those type of jobs.
We use the spinning chair to study motion sickness. It's been described as being a bad hangover. You know, they're hoping they'll be able to control that with drugs. You want people to like space. You don't want them to go up there and feel miserable.
Our data from actual space flight is very limited. We do know that there have been very few instances during past space flights, even when an astronaut was experiencing motion sickness, very few instances when they could not perform. We do administer anti-motion sickness drugs to a fairly large percentage of the astronauts who are flying on the Space Shuttle. Most people are susceptible to motion sickness. There's a very small percentage of the population walking around on the streets who can't be made motion sick. But we always have to be careful because we can't strictly generalize. It's certainly possible for someone who has a minimal history of motion sickness on Earth to still exhibit motion sickness in space.
Well, one of the things that people have found in the 20 or so years that we've been flying in space is that there doesn't seem to be any correlation between the people that get sick on the ground and the people that get sick in space. And I'm not sure whether it's fortunate or unfortunate that I don't get sick on the ground. There's unfortunately no way for them to predict whether I'm going to be one of the ones that does or doesn't get sick.
This is the only way you can get a feeling for zero-G before you actually get to go on your flight. And when you're flying this plane, which is sort of nicknamed the vomit comet, because some people get really sick. It's like being a fish out of water until you get the hang of it. There are some fighter pilots who flew combat missions that go on this thing and just get sicker than sick. It was a real interesting experience.
We do an annual physical evaluation on the astronauts, and in addition to that, just prior to the flight, there's an F-30 or flight day -30 examination, flight day -10 exam, flight day -2 laboratory evaluation, and a launch morning or the evening before launch physical examination. Then there is private medical communication with the astronaut each day during the actual flight that he's assigned to, and subsequent to that, there are post-flight exams on landing, plus an hour or so, and then 5 days after the landing, which is essentially an exam to return them to full duty.
This is the personal rescue sphere we're going to use for possible transfer between spacecraft, and we want you to evaluate it for us as far as your general comfort is concerned. We'll put you in here for an indeterminate length of time, and when you come out, you'll make your report on evaluating the PRS. All right. Okay?
This is the escape sphere. It's going to be used when we have more than one shuttle on orbit. If one shuttle gets into trouble, that spacecraft has to be evacuated. And somebody in a spacesuit will go over and zip these folks up and float them on over to the good spacecraft. Part of the test when they zip you into this thing is they very specifically tell you that you are in there for an undetermined part of time. You're supposed to just sit in there and relax. Well, it's totally dark, and there have been times people have gotten real impatient and tried to rip their way out of there. So they'll get you out of there before you're in too much of a stressful situation. 3 of the women in the office are married to fellow astronauts, and I think Bill Fisher applied every single time up until the point where he and his wife applied. She was selected, but he wasn't. But he still didn't give up, and he got in the class of 1980.
See me waving at you? So it turned out we got married just before she came here for her interview in August of 1977, and we spent our honeymoon here. But in all honesty, and people have trouble believing this, we had one member of our family who'd been selected for the program, and that was great. I mean, we were delighted that one of us could have been selected. I hadn't given up. Nobody told me no forever. They just said, no, not this time. I don't think you need to fly in space to find out how a couple would work out. Stressful environments exist in many other areas, and most couples that have been married a few years can either handle or not handle that type of situation. But I think it's inevitable that as we fly men and women, and space stations have large populations, that there will be couples involved in that, and it'll all work out.
Whether you're a male or a female, it doesn't really matter one way or another, especially in space where, there's only mass, there's no weight, and so you don't have constrictions like with your ability to do something because of strength. Or for me in particular, my sore spot is because of being too short, because I can just float up and reach anything.
Well, there really isn't much to say other than women have equal abilities to men, and they demonstrate it on a daily basis here. There's nothing that they do that the men don't do.
You want to do more than one?
Raj, I want to do EU load across the Earth.
The young ladies in the program do exactly the same thing as all the men. In fact, there is no differentiation between the men and the women in the program.
Well, I have to admit I didn't welcome them when they came on board. I didn't see any real need. They're going to earn their seats because they're good at their job.
very exceptional group of people in terms of native ability. Being an astronaut is not a joyride. People want to fly because up is there.
Very quiet to it.
We're seeing 210, roger.
This is the Model T. This is the first vehicle. This is the one that, you know, when it came time to compromise, we didn't compromise the payload capability, we compromised the crew quarters. So the crew quarters is about like this, you know? There's one bathroom. It takes 25 minutes to go to the bathroom. With 4 people, we're going to spend all of our time in a line to go to the bathroom.
Being an astronaut, you have to go out and do public relations work. Some people do it a lot. Some people avoid it, and some people tolerate it. But on the whole, I think nobody really enjoys doing it.
The fact that women are accepted as many places as they are speaks for itself. So I don't feel that I have to go out and speak for what I have accomplished or what my peers have accomplished. It's just the fact that we're here and we're doing what we're doing on a day-to-day basis and on an equal level as everybody else, and I think that should speak for itself. I wish that I had had role models while I was growing up that would have encouraged me to become an astronaut or to do whatever I wanted to do, and I think that it's a role that someone needs to fill. I'm not sure that I'm the best one to be filling it, or that I'm all that excited about filling that role, but I think that it's definitely a part of the job.
The drink's got to have the top on it. It comes in a nice plastic container, so you don't have to put a label on it, so you won't confuse tomato juice with ginger ale or something like that. It'll have a straw, because take that, you're going to get that big Coke to go, you're going to take the top off of that big Coke, right, from McDonald's. You can take the cup away from the Coke, and there's a Coke sitting there.
To me, the best part of this job is T-38 flying, and it's an early start when you get up and out. A T-38 to me is a beautiful airplane. Well, everything's beautiful from about 41,000 feet. Here's Fred Gregory going out. He's going to fly with Bonnie Dunbar, who's my classmate.
How about the weather up at Salt Lake? Was that bad? Hi, this is Fred Gregory in NASA. I'm going to fly up to Seattle in a 38 at 39,000 with a stop either in Amarillo, Albuquerque, and then up in the Salt Lake area, and then on up to Boeing Field. 600 then from there on up. Where's the snow?
Well, Salt Lake apparently got about a foot last week. Cheers, 5 knots. Departure Ellington Air Force Base. Proposed off at 1300 Zulu. Cruising altitude 390. Number on board is 2. Color of aircraft is white with blue stripe.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If you don't know, my name is Bill Rucking. I'm Vice President of the American Society of Aerospace Pilots. This is the first training meeting.
There are a lot of people who want to be astronauts. It always amazes me. I mean, during the last selection, when they took 21 guys in my class, they had about 8,000 applicants. These men and women are all airline pilots, and they formed the American Society of Aerospace Pilots in Chicago. Their purpose is to train themselves just to pilot the shuttle.
I'm a pilot with Delta Airlines based in Chicago. I fly out of O'Hare here. And I've been an aviation enthusiast since I've been very small and love flying. And to me, I've always wanted to be an astronaut. And before, there was no real way to do that because it was such a small, select group with a lot of highly trained people.
The NASA program is different than what we have in mind. We're more interested in routine commercial space operations, whereas NASA is more interested in research and development type flying. Their requirements are test pilots, and our requirements are to be a commercial pilot, and that's where my background is.
Well, we don't intend to jump the NASA system. Most of us have no interest in working for NASA. First of all, that's engineering test flying. That's something where you sit around in a gray office behind a desk 5 days a week and get to fly every once in a while. Second of all, the pay isn't all that great as a civil servant in the United States. We want to fly commercial spacecraft. We want to fly spacecraft for space lines, just like we fly airliners for airlines. We think that when a private operator starts flying the space shuttle, he will find it to his advantage to hire pilots like us who have many thousands of hours of experience and the proper training to fly the space shuttle. We think that he'll choose us over NASA astronauts.
Okay. Now try track change, which you tried before. I'm just trying
The day of the Superman astronaut is gone. We're now moving into the era where everyone can go to space, either for work or for pleasure. By the year 2000, my personal estimate is we'll have over 1 million people living and working off the planet. I don't think any of our members have ever applied for NASA astronaut training. Again, we're not interested in that type of flying. We're interested in commercial, routine operations. But to answer your question a little bit differently, yes, we are dreamers, and we understand that we're dreamers, but aviators have always been dreamers. We think we see the future coming, and we're preparing for that future. If we're wrong, so what? We've had a great time. We're increasing our professional capabilities, and bottom line is we don't think we're wrong.
One of the guys who found themselves wrong for the job was Brian O'Leary, and he was the first man to drop out of the program, and that was in 1968. He still harbors some of the romanticism that's involved in this job.
I have a few tingles up and down my spine. Whenever I see a launch, I saw a couple of the shuttle launches, when I see a landing, when I'm here and I look nostalgically at where I was, and I look at the huge Apollo Saturn V lying on its side like a big beached whale. I think about how it would have been to ride up on one of these things. When I saw Apollo 11 on television, the first lunar landing, and this was after I had quit, I had a few tears. I thought, well, I almost made it. Of course, if I had stayed in the program, I wouldn't have gone on any of the Apollo flights, but there still was a part of me that said, boy, that would have been the most ultimate high experience to go into space and actually do it. It would have been an exhilarating experience. I might do it yet.
Carolyn Huntoon is a research biochemist for NASA. Although she's never applied for an astronaut job, she'd be real enthusiastic about it.
I would probably give maybe not an arm, but a finger or a hand to have chosen that career at an appropriate time. I did not. Besides, I sort of like the role of helping to select and train these people. I also believe that the Space Shuttle will be taking many people into space besides career astronauts and for scientific reasons, and I certainly would look forward to one of those trips myself in a few years.
You couldn't have got me in one of those spacecraft. You'd put a cannon to my head. And I really guess that's extraordinary. Most of the news people who covered it, most of the people within NASA, all secretly have this Walter Mitty-ish thing about wanting to ride. You couldn't pay me enough to get in one, and you know, I might be the billionth person that goes on the shuttle, but I promise you I wouldn't go any earlier than that.
Whenever you get in a car and you drive down the street, there's always the potential of somebody running into you. In fact, I think the dangers would be a lot worse driving down the Houston freeways than going up into space if you've driven down the Houston freeways. And no matter what you do in life, there's always a possibility of things going wrong. And there's just, all you can do is take prudent precautions to whatever could happen, you know, everything that you can think of, and go on. You just can't sit around all your life and worry about possible things that could go wrong.
This huge swimming pool was designed to fit a full-scale mock-up of the payload bay of the shuttle. The best way to practice what you're going to do in zero-G is to do it in neutral buoyancy, which is under the water. If your payload bay doors don't close, and you're going to go out in a spacesuit and you're going to close them mechanically, you have to practice that before you go. You do it in a pool.
Hey, you can get in.
This is Dick Truly. He was the pilot on the second flight of the Space Shuttle. When you get in a spacesuit on the ground, it's a lot tougher than the guys say it is in space, because you don't have any weight in space. And the suit is very heavy. You can't stand with it upright. You have to have it hooked into some support until you get into the water. Underneath the suit, you wear these long johns that have little Tygon tubes in it, because you can't sweat and cool yourself off, so they run cold water through these tubes. The underwear for the spacesuit and the spacesuit itself are in sizes, just like you'd buy small, medium, large, you know, and then they can sort of sew on shorter arms and legs.
Stand up on your tiptoes and just push it.
You do get gloves to fit your hand, but other than that, the suit is a generic suit, and everybody gets to use them. There will always be 2 spacesuits in the airlock in case you have an emergency. On Flight 11, they're going to test the Buck Rogers pack, and it'll be a little backpack you put on, you can jet around. That'll really be fun. Astronauts are really the very visible part of the space program, but there are thousands of lab technicians who are just as dedicated, or maybe more dedicated than we are. In the suit fitting department, they had the same guy working there since Al Shepard flew in 1961, and he has shaken the hands of every guy who went to the moon. He's a spacesuit technician named Joe Schmidt.
I can't think of any great difference that we'll have any problem with using the women there. We have made a few precautions, like in our spacecraft itself. We have privacy. We have provided privacy. We have curtains that we can close for the privacy of the women and the men. And so I don't see any problem there.
The one question I get asked, maybe it's because I'm a sanitary engineer, but they want to know, how do you go to the toilet in space? It's a problem, but the bigger problem is handling waste under a spacesuit.
For the female, we have a little sort of a pair of pantaloons that has a tight-fitting rim at the bottom, at the legs, and then at the waist. Now, inside this garment, we have a chemical between the layers of the material, and should this be needed, the crewman would use that, and the materials inside would actually absorb the urine.
First spot you might want to go to is the winch. And we'll string up the rope out to the edge of the door.
This is a waste collection system for the Space Shuttle. This waste collection system collects waste from the human, both the liquid form, the urine, and the fecal material. This system was originally designed for both male and female use. You don't have gravity holding you into position when you're using it. You don't have gravity taking everything where it's supposed to go. The urine is collected in this urinal. It's transferred by a fan separator pump to a wastewater tank. Then, if needed, this tank can be dumped in space. The solid waste is collected in a usual manner that we collect solid waste on Earth. The person who's using it sits on the seat and defecates. And this material is drawn by an air stream down into a tank where it contacts a spinning slinger. This slinger throws the material against the walls of the tank and deposits it in a thin layer. Then after the use is completed, this tank is exposed to vacuum. Therefore, all the wastes are dried and become stabilized. For restraining the body during the use, we used to have a seat belt, and we found that that was not adequate. So we've provided a set of thigh bar restraints which exerts a positive force in the downward direction and keep him on the seat. With these new changes in restraints, we won't have any problems with the astronauts using them in flight. Specifically, what will be provided for the females is a clip that will hold this in place with a spring mount so that the female just pushes herself up against this urinal and therefore can use the urinal and the commode in a usual manner. This is actually comes against the female for use, whereas the male doesn't have to come into contact with it. That's the main change that we have to make for female use.
Despite the size of the shuttle, they lift little space for living. They really lift all the space for cargo. There's a flight deck up on top. That's where you fly the spacecraft. One of the pilots in my class is Mike Smith.
This is the flight deck of the shuttle where the commander sits on the left side and the so-called pilot sits on the right side. Most of the controls and displays that you see in front of us here have to do with actually flying the vehicle. There are quite a few switches and knobs and dials on the flight deck, but the things that are here within easy reach are the things that we need to actually fly the vehicle, either on the way up during ascent or on the way down during entry. It's interesting to note that most of the flight instruments that we use in this machine are flight instruments that you would see in any airplane. Some of the scales are a little bit different. The attitude indicator, of course, has to be able to indicate 360 degrees in pitch, roll, and yaw, which is a little bit unusual. The altitude instrumentation, the airspeed instrumentation, all is unusual in that it goes to 400, 500, 600,000 feet and then goes to miles. Most airplanes only go up to 80,000 feet or so. And of course the airspeed indicator goes all the way up to Mach 25 or 26.
When you're sleeping in space is keep your hands down, because your hands will float up, hit yourself, and wake yourself up. So what you're actually doing is restraining yourself, just the way it says. And it doesn't matter whether you're right side up, upside down, or anything like that. You just sort of have to keep yourself off to the side. A lot of the crewmen actually prefer to just float around. It's a lot easier just to float around. It's sort of a treat too. Over here we have some personal clothing. And you can see that, well, everything they give you, it's all supplied. You don't take any of your own clothing. And since this is a male crew, they have a male personal hygiene kit. We have female personal hygiene kits too, but luckily they have little different items in them than this. But they do have the same toothbrush. If you wanted it, there's the option to have makeup in here. And that's because some of the ladies wear makeup on a normal basis, and they think they'd look terrible without it. And some of us don't use it at all. You notice we don't have a shower in here. Just regular old soap. So what you have to do is use the personal hygiene water gun and you take a sponge bath. Okay, and the reason no shower is in here because we figured we weren't going to be up here for more than 7 days, so it wasn't worth putting one in. We're supposed to rough it. And this is a non-functional item because if it was real, you just twist this up and it's an electric razor. Okay, and it runs on a little spring. That's a regular old hairbrush. And some deodorant. This is British Sterling. You see, maybe we wouldn't want to use British Sterling. I don't know. But you want to look good if you get off a spaceship. You don't want to look bad. We got an item we use on orbit real often, just like you do in any house, is a vacuum cleaner. I think you're going to see that sort of just like any vacuum cleaner is. We have little bags here, and you just load them in and throw them away. It's a little handheld. This one will clean up both dirt and water. So this is how, if you have a water spill, you have a glob of water and all it does is float all over the place, so you catch it with this thing. Or else the screens where the air intakes are, you collect a lot of garbage there, so you'll vacuum those off to clean them off. A crucial item right there.
During ascent and entry, I'm going to be the mission specialist that is acting as the flight engineer, like a flight engineer on most commercial airlines, sitting third seat behind the pilot and the commander, and helping them out reading checklists and going through the procedures, and I'm involved with them in ascent and entry. On orbit, we have a good flight. We're going to be up for 7 days. And we're deploying 2 communication satellites on the first 2 days, one for the Canadian government and one for the Indonesian government. And then we're starting to carry out a lot of experiments that are carried up in the cargo bay as well as in the middeck. We spend the 3rd day doing that, and then the 4th day we are going to be the first ones to do what's called proximity operations, where we're using the Canadian-built arm and demonstrate the shuttle's capability to retrieve a satellite that's already in orbit and bring it back down, which is something that NASA's been advertising for quite a while, but we haven't demonstrated it yet. And that's going to be, I think, a big step for the program.
Well, the arm can be very precise. You can position within, say, half an inch and half of a degree of where you want to put it. Essentially, the way that the operator uses the arm is by hand controllers, and if you think of the arm like your own human arm, you say, well, I want to go up, so you move the hand controller up, and the whole arm goes up, and you don't have to figure out what to do with your shoulder and what to do with your elbow and what to do with your wrist. The unique thing about the arm is that it can be used to retrieve a satellite, which right now is the only tool we have to retrieve a satellite if it's malfunctioning or needs its batteries changed or something like that. The orbiter can fly up, do a rendezvous with a satellite in orbit, and if it has the proper fixture on it, you can use the arm to grab hold of the fixture and actually bring the satellite into the cargo bay of the orbiter, either to fix EVA, for example, to change its film or to fix a problem, and then put it back. Or if it has a more serious problem, you can bring it back to Earth, do more extensive repairs on it, and then send it up again and redeploy it. In watching the class of 1978 starting to fly, and us in the class of 1980 are understanding that spaceflight is getting closer for us too. I don't believe in discrimination on the basis of sex. I shouldn't single Sally out as being special because of her gender. But when STS-7 launches, I'll probably be thinking about Sally. What would Sally have been if she decided not to be an astrophysicist? If she hadn't read that advertisement saying, do you want to be an astronaut? Yes, you're a girl, you can do that. She wouldn't be here. I think she must feel some responsibility. I mean, there are going to be a lot of little girls out there watching saying, hey, maybe I'd like to do that when I grow up, and they didn't have that option before. I would think that she'd want to perform and be better than if she was a guy.
The point I want to stress and make quite clear is that There are no particular special qualifications that Sally possesses that made her more appealing as the first U.S. woman in space than the other women do. It could have very well, because of a specific training cycle that one of the women astronauts went through, it could have been one of the others instead of Sally. So we did not select 6 women at first and then 2 more with the intent of finding the best one of them to put as number 1. That was not the intention at all. They were all trained equally and are continuing their training. And when Sally comes back, she'll enter back in the training cycles. So it's a constant job with the astronauts.
But certainly we had to be conscious, and we're conscious of the fact that Sally was a woman. We knew she was a woman, and that she was going to be under a lot of pressure by selecting her for that flight, because she is the first American woman to fly. We certainly had to give that a lot of consideration, a lot of thought as to that she had to be able to perform in that environment and be able to handle that kind of pressure. And we didn't have any qualms about Sally being able to do that.
That's something that that all of us have hoped for, and that's the reason that we joined the program, was for that minute to be told that we were going to get a chance to fly. And I was so excited that I didn't have any reaction at all. I just stood there. Just stood there and looked at him.
This is mission control, where they run the whole show. This will be the first time that Sally is talking to mission control from the other side. I'm going to be working in here and hopefully getting to talk to her maybe a little bit on the radio, making it easier for them to get the most work out of their little bit of time up there. This whole room works as a team. In fact, there really are teams that come on and off. There are a number of guys in the office who've been around for a while. They've flown in Apollo and Skylab and even Gemini. And one of the guys who can give you an awful lot of answers, he has been in space for 435 hours. He went around the moon. Ken Mattingly.
Maybe the thing that's so fascinating about space is it represents today's new frontier. It's the thing you travel through to go to somewhere else. Probably all countries need heroes, whether they're quarterbacks, goalies, astronauts. There needs to be something that has some glamour, give them something to attach to. I guess we all accept the fact that part of our job is to be in that role. From the time I was a little kid, I used to look up in the sky and see the moon and lay out on the beach and say, I wonder what it looks like to look up and see the Earth. And now that's history. I'd like to see what it looks like to be on another planet. I probably won't get to do that, but I'm going to get to watch pictures that someone else takes.
There is no final frontier. To me, it's a current frontier. I mean, if guys had said going to the Americas is the last frontier, well, how right would they have been?
Friday, Hawaii 5-0 is back.